Okay, we're going to do something new today. I thought it might be useful if I read some chapters of Virgil's Aeneid to you. So I'm going to read chapter 1 today. Apologies if you don't like the anglicisation of the names, but it's probably less offensive that way around than if I rendered them all into Latin pronunciation. We're using this, which is the W.F.Jackson Knight translation. Nothing against the David West translation. David West's wonderful. He was an excellent man. But this just happens to be the one that I've got here. Hopefully, over the next 12 days, I'll do all 12 books. But for today, Virgil's Aeneid, Book 1. This is a tale of arms and of a man. Fated to be an exile, he was the first to sail from the land of Troy and reach Italy at its Lavinian shore. He met many tribulations on his way, both by land and on the ocean. High heaven willed it, for Juno was ruthless and could not forget her anger. And he had also to endure great suffering in warfare. But at last he succeeded in founding his city and installing the gods of his race in the Latin land. And that was the origin of the Latin nation, the lords of Alba, and the proud battlements of Rome. I pray for inspiration to tell how it all began, and how the Queen of Heaven sustained such outrage to Her Majesty that in her indignation she forced a man famed for his true-heartedness to tread that long path of adventure, and to face so many trials. It's hard to believe gods in heaven capable of such rancour. Once there was an ancient town called Carthage, inhabited by emigrants from Tyre, and confronting Italy opposite to the mouth of the Tiber but far away. Carthage had wealth and power, and it had skill and ferocity in war. Now Juno is said to have loved Carthage best of all cities in the world, giving even Samos the second place. She kept her weapons and her chariot there, and she had already set her heart on making it a capital city, governing all the earth, and spared no effort of fostering care, hoping that destiny might consent to her desire. She had, however, heard of another breed of men tracing descent from the blood of Troy, who were one day to overthrow this Tyrian stronghold, for they would breed a warrior nation, haughty and sovereign over wide realms, and their onset would bring destruction to Africa. Such, she had heard, was the plan of the spinning fates, and it was this plan that Juno feared. Neither could she forget the Trojan War, when she had battled in the forefront for the Argos, which she loved. She remembered the origin of that quarrel and the fierce indignation which it had caused her. The judgment of Paris, with its unjust slight to her beauty, remained indelibly stamped on her mind, and besides she was always jealous of the whole Trojan race, and could not forget how Ganymede had been stolen and honoured. Such were the causes of Juno's fury, and so it was that the Trojan remnant, whom the Greeks, even pitiless Achilles, could not kill, were tossed in storm over all the ocean, and still she kept them far from Latium, wandering for years at the mercy of fate from sea to sea about the world. Such was the cost in heavy toil of beginning the life of Rome. The Trojans had put out to sea from Sicily. They were just out of sight of land, the bronze-plated oars churning the salt water to foam, and they were happily hoisting sail when Juno, perpetually nursing her heart's deep wound, spoke to herself. I, vanquished, I to abandon the fight, lacking even the strength to keep Troy's prince from making Italy? The fates forbid me indeed, yet they never stopped Minerva from gutting the Argives' fleet by fire, and drowning all of them merely because one man, Ajax, son of Oileus, he alone went mad and sinned. She borrowed Jupiter's devouring fire and sped it from the clouds. She shattered the ships and tore up the surface of ocean with winds. And when Ajax, pierced through the breast by the lightning flame, was breathing his last, she caught him up in a tornado and impaled him on a pointed rock. Yet I, in my stately precedence, queen of all the divine, I, the sister and wife of Jove, have been making war for all these years on a single clan. Will anyone again pay reverence to Juno's majesty, or lay his offering on her altar in humble prayer? Debating so with herself in her fiery brain, she went straight to Aeolia, where the storm clouds have their home, and mad winds are bursting to be free. In the great spaces of a cavern they wrestle, and hurricanes roar. But Aeolus, the king who rules them, confines them in their prison, disciplined and curbed. They race from door to bolted door, and all the mountain reverberates with the noise of their resentment. But Aeolus, throned securely above them, sceptre in hand, tempers their arrogance and controls their fury. Otherwise they would sweep violently away with them every land, every sea, and the very depths of the sky, and drive them all through space. Foreseeing this, therefore, the Father, with whom is all power, banished the winds to that dark cavern, and piled above them a mountain mass, appointing a king over them who, under a fixed charter, would know how to hold them confined, and also, when so commanded, to give them a free rein. To this king of the winds Juno now made her submissive appeal. To you, my lord Aeolus, he who is father of all gods and king of all men, has given authority to lull the waves or to rouse them with a wind. Now a certain people whom I hate are sailing on the Etruscan sea, and conveying Troy itself and the vanquished gods of Trojan homes to Italy. Smite fury into your winds, sink their ships, make the sea close over them, or drive them apart, pitch out their crews, and scatter them on the deep. I chance to have 14 sea nymphs of striking beauty, and Deipea is the loveliest of them all, and I shall assign her to be yours in lawful marriage, and in return for your great goodness to me she shall live out with you all the years to come, and make you father of splendid sons. Replying, Aeolus spoke thus: Highness, your sole task is to decide what your wish is to be, and my only duty is prompt obedience to you. I owe to you all my authority in this little realm of mine, for it was you who won for me Jupiter's favour. I owe to you my place at the feasts of the immortals, and from you I hold my power over storm clouds and over storms. This said, he swung his trident round where the shell of the cliff was thin, and struck home. The winds formed line, and charged through the outlet which he had made. With tornado blasts they swept the earth, they swooped down on the sea. Winds of the east and the south, and the African wind with squall after squall, came tearing from their depths, and set the long rollers rolling to the shores. Now men were shouting and tackle shrieking. In a moment the clouds had wrested from Trojan eyes the sky and the light of day. A blackness as of night fell on the ocean. The thunder cracked in heaven's height, and in the air above a continuous lightning flared. Wherever the Trojans looked, immediate death stared them in the eyes. Instantly Aeneas felt his limbs give way in a chill of terror, and groaned. Stretching both hands palm upward to the stars, he cried aloud, How fortunate were you, thrice fortunate and more, whose luck it was to die under the high walls of Troy before your parents' eyes. Ah, Diomede, most valiant of Greeks, why did your arm not strike me down and give my spirit freedom in the death on the battlefields of Ilium, where lie the mighty Sarpedon and Hector, the manslayer, pierced by Achilles' lance, and where Simois rolls down submerged beneath his stream those countless shields and helms, and all those valiant dead? Aeneas was still pouring forth his words when a howling blast from the north struck squarely his ship's sail and flung the waves sky high. Oars broke, the bow sheered away, and she took the sea full on her beam. On came, towering, a piled precipice of water. Some of the crew hung poised on wave crests, others saw the waves sink before them to disclose below seething water and sand the very bottom of the sea. The south wind next caught up 3 other ships, and flung them spinning onto a large spine of rocks, half submerged in mid-ocean and far out from Italy, where they are called the Altars. The east wind drove 3 more away from the open sea onto quicksands and shallow water. To the dismay of their friends, the wind ran them aground and built up over them a mountain of sand. One ship carried the Lycians under the trusty chief Orontes. As Aeneas watched, a gigantic breaker came crashing from its crest onto the stern. The helmsman was whirled head foremost overboard, and fell face downwards. The ship spun 3 times round where she lay, and then a whirlpool caught her and sucked her under. Some of the crew could be seen, one here, one there, swimming in the waste of water. Fragments of wreckage, personal equipment, precious things saved from Troy, floated on the waves. The storm had now prevailed against the 2 stout ships of Ilioneus and of the valiant Achates, and 2 others also, one carrying Abas and the other the aged Aletes. Every ship had sprung her timbers. The cracks widened, and the deadly sea streamed in. But meanwhile, Neptune had been made aware by the ocean's roaring commotion and the currents eddying even in the sea's still depths that a storm had been unleashed. Gravely provoked, he raised his head from the waves, and, looking forth serenely high above the surface, he saw Aeneas's fleet scattered, and his Trojans overborne by violent waves, and all the sky teeming down. He soon realized the trick played by his spiteful sister Juno. He summoned the winds of the east and the west before him, and straightway spoke. So, winds, is this the length to which your pride of birth prompts you to go? You actually dare, without my sovereign consent, to throw sky and earth into confusion, and raise these mountainous seas? I'll show you. But no, first I'd better set the waves at rest. After that you are going to pay dearly for your offence. Make haste now and withdraw, and give your king a message from me. Dominion over the ocean, sanctioned by the ruthless trident, was allotted not to him, but to me. His place is the rock's vast cavern, where, wind of the east, you winds have your home. That is the royal court of Aeolus. There he may vaunt his sovereign pride, so long as he keeps the prison of the winds well barred. Speaking thus, and quicker than speech, he made the heaving ocean calm. He routed the gathering clouds and brought back the sun, and as he did so, Triton and Cymothoe pressed against the ships and dislodged them from the cutting rocks, and Neptune aided them, levering with his trident. Great sandbanks reappeared as, lightly skimming the wave crests in his chariot, he calmed the sea. It had been like a sudden riot in some great assembly, when, as they will, the meaner folk forget themselves and grow violent, so that firebrands and stones are soon flying, for savage passion quickly finds weapons. But then they may chance to see some man whose character and record command their respect. If so, they will wait in silence, listening keenly. He will speak to them, calming their passions and guiding their energies. So now all the uproar of the ocean subsided. Its lord, Father Neptune, had only to look forth over the sea. Then, under a cloudless heaven, he wheeled his horses, gave them the rein, and let his willing chariot fly. Thoroughly exhausted, Aeneas and his men made efforts to run for the nearest land within reach. They set course for the coast of Africa. There is a haven there at the end of a long sound, quite landlocked by an island in the shape of two breakwaters, which parts the waves entering from the open sea and draws them off into long channels. On each shore a frightening headland of rock towers massively into the sky, and the wide expanse of water which they overshadow is noiseless and secure. Beyond the water a curtain of trees with quivering leaves reaches downwards, and behind them is an overchanging forest-clad mountainside, mysterious and dark. There is a cave directly in front, at the foot of the cliffs, and inside it are stalactites and fresh water, and there are seats there cut in the living rock, for nymphs have their home in the cave. Here, a tired ship will never need a cable or an anchor with a fluke to bite and make her fast. Aeneas, who had reunited only a bare 7 ships out of all his fleet, moved up into the Sound. The Trojans, yearning to be on dry land again, disembarked, and, delighted to feel the sand under them, lay down, all caked with brine, on the beach. Achates struck a spark from a flint, the first thing to be done. He had leaves there to catch the fire, which he fed by putting dry material around it, and he quickly had a flame in the tinder. Others, although utterly weary from their plight, fetched out some grain which they'd saved, though it was the worse for sea-water, and utensils for cooking. They prepared to grind the corn on stone and bake bread. While they did so, Aeneas climbed a rock commanding a wide, unbroken view far across the sea, in the hope of sighting some Trojan ships, wind-battered but still afloat, the ship perhaps of Antheus, or of Capys or Caicus, with her high, blazoned stern. But there was not a ship to be seen. He could see, however, 3 stags straying on the shore, and behind them, in a long line, their whole herd grazing in a valley. Abruptly he stopped, and quickly he gripped a bow and some arrows, swift to fly, which his faithful Achates had been carrying. His first shots brought the leaders to the ground, stags with tall antlers like tree branches. Next he turned on the herd, and his arrows stampeded them in confusion among the green forest trees. Aeneas only ceased shooting when he had triumphantly laid on the earth 7 weighty carcasses, in number equal to the surviving ships. He now made his way back to the haven, and shared the meat among his company, and with it he apportioned the cargo of wine casks, which with a hero's generosity the kindly Acestes had given them on the beach in Sicily as they embarked. He then spoke to them to console them in their grief. Friends of mine, we've long been no strangers to affliction, and you have had worse than this to bear. Now, as before, Providence will bring your suffering to an end. You've sailed right in among the rocks where Scylla's rabid sea dogs bark. You've faced the Cyclopes, monsters of the stones. You must revive your spirits and dismiss unhappiness and fear. Perhaps one day you will enjoy looking back even on what you now endure. We've forced our way through adventures of every kind, risking all again and again, but the way is the way to Latium, where destiny offers us rest and a home, and where imperial Troy may have the right to live again. Hold hard, therefore. Preserve yourselves for better days. Such were the words he spoke, but he was sick at heart, for the cares which he bore were heavy indeed. Yet he concealed his sorrow deep within him, and his face looked confident and cheerful. The Trojans now prepared to deal with the game on which they were soon to feast. Some of them flayed the hides from the ribs, disclosing the meat. Others then cut the meat into steaks and spitted it, quivering. Others again found places on the beach for cauldrons and provided the fires to boil them. Then they ate and restored their strength. Stretched on the grass, they filled themselves with old wine and rich venison and feasted till their hunger was gone. When the meal was cleared away, they talked long, in sadness for their lost comrades, poised between the hope that they might possibly be living yet and the fear that they had reached their life's ending and were beyond all human appeal. More than any other, Aeneas the true sighed within himself for the lot of the fiery Orontes and of Amycus, thinking of each one, or again of some terrible fate which Lycus might have met, and then of Gyas and of Cloanthus, his valiant friends. They had now finished their meal when Jupiter looked down from heaven's height on the sea, where the white wings sail, on the lands flat below, on the coasts, and on the nations of the wide world. He stood in the zenith of the sky, and his eyes rested on royal Carthage. Then suddenly, as he pondered gravely on the issues involved, Venus addressed him. She was downcast, and tears stood in her glistening eyes as she spoke. Disposer by eternal decrees of all life human and divine, you whose bolt of thunder is our dread, how can Aeneas, my dear son, and the other Trojans have given you offence so grave? Often has death visited them, and now, because they make for Italy, all the earth is closed to them. Yet your promise was of Romans, leaders of men, who should one day, with the rolling of the years, be their descendants, with Teucer's blood, strong once more, running in their veins. They were to discipline all the sea and all lands under their law. Father, what thought has been changing your will? As for me, your promise consoled me for the dread havoc of Troy's fall, since I could weigh against her fate the compensation of this new destiny. But now, the Trojans, driven on from disaster to disaster, are still being pursued by the same ill fortune. Monarch supreme, what end to their ordeals will you grant them? After all, Antenor escaped right through the press of Greeks, and contrived to sail safely up to the head of the Adriatic, where the Liburnians hold rule, even reaching the fount of the Timavus River, through whose 9 mouths sea water bursts forth from echoing caverns below, so that ocean's roar is heard on the meadows of the land. And here Antenor actually found a place where Trojans might settle, and named his city Padua. He has given its people a Trojan name, and hung Trojan weapons on the walls, and there, in relief from turmoil, he is serenely at peace. Yet we, your own children, having your own permission to climb the very citadel of heaven, are, all through the anger of one, most monstrously betrayed. Our ships are lost, and we're parted far from Italy's coasts. Do you reward our reverence for you? Is this how you install us in the royalty which is our due? The creator of the gods and of humankind smiled on her with the smile which he wears when he calms the storms and clears the sky. Lightly he kissed his daughter and then spoke. Spare your fears, Cytherean. You have your people's destiny still, and it shall not be disturbed. You shall see your city, see Lavinium's walls, for I have promised them, and you shall exalt to the stars of heaven your son Aeneas, the great of heart. There is no thought changing my will, but now, because anxiety for him so pricks you, therefore shall I speak of the more distant future, and turning the scroll of the fates awake their secrets. Know then that Aeneas shall fight a great war in Italy, and overthrow proud peoples. He shall establish for his warriors a way of life, and walls for their defence. And he shall live until the third summer looks on his reign in Latium, and he has passed his third winter in camp since his conquest of the Rutulians. But Ascanius, his young son, who is now given a second name, Aeolus, having been Ilus as long as the sovereignty of Ilium survived, shall complete in royal power each circling month for 30 long years. Active and vigorous, he shall build Alba Longa to be strong, and thither shall he transfer his rule from its old seat Lavinium. And here, under a dynasty of Hector's kin, the royal power shall live. Here kings shall reign for a period of 300 years, until one day Ilia, a priestess of the royal blood, shall bear twin sons to Mars. And then shall one Romulus, nursed by a wolf, and gay in a red-brown wolfskin, inherit the line. He shall build battlements of Mars and call his peoples Romans, after his own name. To Romans I set no boundary in space or time. I have granted them dominion, and it has no end. Yes, even the furious Juno, who now wearies sea, earth, and heaven with the strain of fear, shall amend her plans, and she and I will foster the nation which wears the toga, the Roman nation, masters of the world. My decree is made. Time in its 5-year spans shall slip by till an age shall come when the house of Assaracus shall crush to subjection even Phthia and illustrious Mycenae, and conquer Argos, and hold mastery there. And then shall be born of proud descent from Troy one Caesar, to bound his lordship by ocean's outer stream, and his fame by the starry sky, a Julius bearing a name inherited from Iulus his great ancestor. One day you shall welcome to heaven with peace in your heart this Julius, coming weighted with the spoils of the Orient, and he also shall be invoked to listen to prayers. Then shall our furious centuries lay down their warring arms, and shall grow kind. Silver-haired Fidelity, Vesta, and Quirine Romulus, with his brother Remus at his side, shall make the laws, and the terrible iron-constricted gates of war shall shut, and safe within them shall stay the godless and ghastly lust of blood, propped on his pitiless piled armoury, and still roaring from gory mouth, but held fast by 100 chains of bronze, knotted behind his back. So he prophesied, and he sent Maia's son Mercury down from heaven. For the land of Africa and Carthage itself, with its newly built defences, were to stand open to receive the Trojans as guests, and Dido must not forbid them her territory through ignorance of the ordained plan. So, awed by his wings, Mercury flew, striking out across the broad sky, and swiftly he was there, standing on the coast of Africa. He obeyed his instructions, and at his divine will the Carthaginians put from them all thoughts of hostility. Especially he inspired their queen with a tolerance for the Trojans and a kindly intent. Meanwhile, Aeneas the True, after a night spent in thought, decided to walk out in the freshness of the dawn to investigate the new country, and to see on what coast the wind had driven him, and what creatures lived there, whether men or wild animals, for he had noticed that the land was uncultivated. He could then report precisely to his comrades. He left the ships concealed under the tree's mysterious shade, enclosed by the wooded headlands and overhung by the cliff. He stepped out accompanied by Achates alone, and carrying 2 hunting spears with broad iron heads quivering in his hand. Under the trees his mother met him. She had a maiden's countenance and a maiden's guise, and carried a maiden's weapons, like some Spartan girl, or like Harpalyce, the Thracian, who outruns horses till they tire, and outstrips even the winged river Hebrus. Slung ready on her shoulder, she carried a bow as a huntress would, and she had let her hair stream in the wind. Her tunic's flowing folds were caught up and tied, and her knees were bare. She spoke first. "Ho there, young sirs, do you happen to have seen one of my sisters wearing a quiver and a cloak of spotted lynx skin? Wandering about here, or shouting hard on the track of some foam-flecked boar? If so, tell me where." So said Venus, and her son started to answer her. "No, I have neither seen nor heard any sister of yours, young lady. Only, how am I to speak to you? You have not the countenance of humankind, and your voice has no tones of mortality. goddess, for a goddess surely you must be, not Apollo's own sister, or one who is kin to the nymphs. Oh, I entreat your favour, whoever you may be, and some relief in our tribulation. Pray tell us under what skies we stand, and where on the world's shores have we been cast? A violent hurricane with its giant waves has driven us hither, and here we now stray, not knowing where we are or who are the inhabitants. If you tell us, we shall offer many victims to you to fall dead before your altars. And Venus answered, I'm not one to claim any such honour as that. It's the usual habit of Carthaginian maids to carry a quiver and to wear these high-laced hunting boots of dark red. The country which you see is ruled by Phoenicians from Tyre, and Agenor's dynasty reigns in their city. But around them is Africa, and no war can subjugate Africans. Queen Dido, who directs the councils of our state, came here from Tyre, wishing to escape her brother. It's a long and intricate tale of wrong, but I shall trace for you the main events of the story. Dido was married to Sychaeus, who was the greatest landowner of all the Phoenicians, and to her sorrow she loved him ardently. She had been a maid when her father gave her to him, and her union with him was her first marriage, but she had a brother Pygmalion, who then occupied the throne at Tyre, and he was a monster of unmatched wickedness. A murderous quarrel broke out between the princes. Pygmalion was so blind with lust for gold that he lay in wait for Sychaeus at a holy rite, caught him off his guard, and sacrilegiously struck him down with a dagger thrust. But he forgot to fear the power of his sister's love. For long Pygmalion concealed his deed, giving Dido false reasons for hope, and with many cruel pretences deluding her heart-sick anxiety. Then, while she slept, the actual spectre of Sychaeus, who was yet unburied, raised before her eyes a face weirdly pale. The wraith revealed the brutal deed at the sacrifice, showed the dagger wounds in his breast, and disclosed the whole wicked secret of the palace, and he pressed her to leave her homeland and flee in haste. To help her on her journey, he told her where there lay in the earth a long buried and forgotten treasure of gold and silver in great weight. Shocked by the vision, Dido began to prepare for flight, and to gather for her company any who savagely hated or sharply feared the evil king. They assembled, hastily seized some ships which happened to be ready for sailing, and loaded them with the gold. The miserly Pygmalion lost his hoard, for it was conveyed over the ocean, and the whole enterprise was led by a woman. So they reached this place where you can already see the towering battlements of a new city, Carthage, and its citadel even now being built. They bought as much land as they could enclose within the bull's hide, and this land is still called the Hide after that event. But tell me, who are you? From what country do you come, and whither do you voyage? In answer to her questions, Aeneas spoke with a deep sigh out of his very heart. Lady divine, if I were to start at the beginning and then continue all the chronicle of our ordeals, and if there were the time for you to hear, the star of evening would surely close heaven's gate and set the day to sleep before the end. From ancient Troy, if that name has ever chanced to come to your ears, we had been sailing over many strange seas, and then, of its own caprice, a storm drove us on Africa's coast. I'm Aeneas, called the True, and I carry with me in my ships the gods of our home rescued from the foe. Beyond the sky my fame is known, and I quest for Italy, the land where my family first sprang from supreme Jove. Following my allotted destiny and shown my way by my divine mother, I sailed forth onto the Phrygian sea with 20 ships. Scarce 7 survive, wrested from the easterly wind and from the waves, and here I wander in want unknown about Africa's wilderness, driven first from Asia and now from Europe too. But Venus would not listen to more complaints from him, and she interrupted his lament. Whoever you are, they who dwell in heaven can scarcely hate you, I think. You still breathe and live, and you have reached the city of the Tyrians. Continue on this path till you come to the doorway of the queen's palace, for I can tell you that the winds, veering to the north, have reversed their direction. Your ships have been driven to safety, and your comrades have returned to you. If not, then my parents made false claims, and the lessons in prophecy which they gave me have been failures. Look at those 12 swans gaily in line. Jupiter's eagle had swooped down from the heights of air and was just now pursuing them across the whole breadth of the sky, and yet you can now see some of the swans alighting in their long ranks on the ground, and others looking down from air to earth, where some have already settled. As these swans, now whirring their wings in play, have come safely home, while others flock and freely circle, trumpeting in the zenith, so too some of your ships with their Trojan crews are safe in harbour, while others with bellying sails are drawing near to the haven's mouth. So just continue your walk and go ahead where the way leads you. So Venus spoke, and as she turned away, her loveliness shone. A tint of rose glowed on her neck, and a scent of heaven breathed from the divine hair of her head. Her gown trailed down to her feet. Her gait alone proved her a goddess. Aeneas recognized his mother, and as she vanished, his cry followed swiftly after. "Oh, you're too cruel! Why again and again deceive your own son with your mocking disguises? Why may I not join hand to hand, hear you in frankness, and speak to you in return?" As he reproached her thus, he stepped out towards the city walls. For her part, Venus fenced the two Trojans with a thick mist, enveloping them by her divine power with a mantle of dense cloud, so that no one might notice or touch them, hinder them, or ask them why they'd come. And Venus herself departed, soaring high into the air to Paphos. Joyously she returned to her own home, where stands her temple, and its 100 altars ever warm with the incense of Sheba, and where unceasingly a perfume is breathed from garlands of freshly gathered flowers. Meanwhile, the Trojans hurried along their way, guided by the path. They were now climbing a massive hill which overhung the city and commanded a view of the citadel. Aeneas looked wonderingly at the solid structures springing up where there had once been only African huts, and at the gates, the turmoil, and the paved streets. The Tyrians were hurrying about busily, some tracing a line for the walls and manhandling stones up the slopes as they strained to build their citadel, and others sighting some building and marking its outline by ploughing a furrow. And they were making choice of laws, of officers of state, and of councillors to command their respect. At one spot they were excavating the harbour, and at another a party was laying out an area for the deep foundations of a theatre. They were also hewing from quarries mighty pillars to stand tall and handsome beside the stage, which was still to be built. It was like the work which keeps the bees hard at their tasks about the flowering countryside as the sun shines in the calm of early summer, when they escort their new generation now full grown into the open air, or squeeze clear honey into bulging cells, packing them with sweet nectar, or else take over loads brought by their foragers, or sometimes form up to drive a flock of lazy drones from their farmstead. All is a ferment of activity, and the scent of honey rises with the perfume of time. Aeneas looked up at the buildings. "Oh, fortunate people," he exclaimed, "for your city walls are already rising." He walked on, miraculously protected by the cloud, right through the multitudes, mingling among the Carthaginians, but noticed by none. In the heart of the city there was a group of trees giving a wealth of shade. Here the Phoenicians, while they were still shaken after their stormy voyage, had dug from the earth a symbol whose discovery Juno, in her queenly knowledge, had predicted. It was the head of a spirited horse, and it indicated that the nation would have distinction in war and a plentiful livelihood through centuries to come. At this spot Dido the Phoenician was beginning to build a vast and sumptuous temple for Juno. Inside it the dedicated offerings were magnificent, and the goddess's powerful presence could be felt. Bronzen were the raised thresholds to which the stairways led. Bronze clamped the beams, and of bronze were the doors which made the hinges groan. Here, among the trees, a strange experience met Aeneas. For the first time his fears were allayed, and for the first time he dared to hope for life, and to feel some confidence in spite of his distress. For as, while waiting for the queen, he inspected everything which there was to see under the mighty temple roof, in wonder at the city's prosperity, the competitive skill of the craftsmen, and the great scale of their tasks, he saw pictured there the Trojan War, with all the battles round Ilium in their correct order, for their fame had already spread over the world. Agamemnon and Menelaus were there, and Priam. There too was Achilles, merciless alike to all three. Aeneas stood still, the tears came, and he said, "O Achates, where in the world is there a country or any place in it unreached by our suffering? Look, there's Priam. Even here high merit has its due. There is pity for a world's distress, and sympathy for short-lived humanity. Dispel all fear. The knowledge of you shown here will help to save you." So he spoke. It was only a picture, but sighing deeply, he let his thoughts feed on it, and his face was wet with a stream of tears, for he seemed to see again the antagonists warring around the defences of Troy. On one side, the Greeks in flight before the charge of Troy's manhood, and on another, the Trojans in retreat, and the crested and chariot-borne Achilles in pursuit. Still in tears, he recognised in another scene the snow-white tents of Rhesus' encampment, betrayed to Diomede during the early hours of sleep, and wrecked by him. And Diomede himself, bloody from the great massacre, was shown driving the fiery horses away to the Greek camp before they could taste the grass of Troyland and drink the water of Xanthus. Elsewhere, poor young Troilus was pictured in ill-matched combat with Achilles, and in flight before him. He'd lost his weapons, and his horses had bolted. He was on his back, trailing from his empty chariot, but still grasping his reins, with his neck and hair dragging over the ground, and his lance pointing back and tracing lines in the dust. Meanwhile, ladies of Troy, with hair thrown free, were seen walking in a mournful procession of supplication. They'd been beating their breasts with open hands, and they were bearing an offering of a robe to the temple of Pallas. But she was not impartial, for she stood with averted face and looked fixedly at the ground. And Achilles was shown again, this time selling back for gold Hector's lifeless body, which he had dragged behind his chariot 3 times round the walls of Ilium. At that last sight of his friend, a lifeless body despoiled of arms, and of the chariot, and Priam holding forth weaponless hands in entreaty, Aeneas sighed a deep and terrible sigh. He also recognised himself, hotly engaged among the Greek chieftains. He saw, too, the fighting ranks from the Orient, led by black Memnon with his divine arms, and battle-mad Penthesilea was there, leading the charge of Amazons, carrying their crescent shields. In the midst of thousands she blazed, showing her breast uncovered with a gold girdle clasped below, a warrior maid daring the shock of combat against men. As Aeneas the Dardan looked in wonder at these pictures of Troy, rapt and intent in concentration, for he had eyes only for them, the queen herself, Dido, in all her beauty, walked to the temple in state, closely attended by a numerous youthful retinue. She was like Diana when she keeps her dancers dancing on the banks of Eurotas, or along the slopes of Cynthus, with 1,000 mountain nymphs following in bands on this side and on that. She is taller than all other goddesses, as with her quiver slung from her shoulder, she steps on her way, and a joy beyond words steals into Latona's heart. Like her was Dido, and like her she walked happily with the throng around her, intent on hastening the work for her future realm. And then, facing the goddess's doorway, under her temple dome, with her armed guards about her, she took her seat in the centre of a raised throne. She was already announcing new laws and statutes to her people, and deciding by her own balanced judgment or by lot a fair division of the toil demanded of them, when suddenly Aeneas saw, moving towards them, and followed by a large crowd, Antheus, Sergestus, and the bold Cloanthus with other Trojans, whom the dark hurricane had scattered over the ocean and carried far away to distant shores. Amazed at this sight, Aeneas and Achates both stopped, overjoyed and yet anxious. They were in burning haste to clasp their comrades' hands, but disturbed by the mystery of it all. So they made no sign, but still shrouded by the soft mist, they watched, hoping to discover how their friends had fared, where they'd left their ships moored, and why they had come to Carthage. For representatives from every ship were in the crowd, walking amid the noise to the temple to plead for a sympathetic hearing. The Trojans now entered and were allowed to speak directly with the queen. In calm self-possession, Ilioneus, the eldest amongst them, began. Your Majesty, to whom Jupiter has granted the right to build your new city, and assigned the duty of curbing lawless tribes with your justice, we're hapless Trojans, whom the winds have carried over every sea. We now entreat you, fend from our ships the terrible flames, and show mercy to a God-fearing breed of men, and indeed consider our predicament more closely. We can hardly have come to devastate your African home with the sword, or to lift your cattle and drive them to the beach. As vanquished men, we could never be so arrogant and so aggressive. No, but there is a region for which the Greeks use the name Hesperia, the western land, an ancient land with might in her arms and in her fertile soil. The inhabitants used to be the Oenotrians, but it is said that their descendants have now called the country Italy after one of their leaders. To Italy we're setting our course, We were, when suddenly at the rising of Orion, star of storms, the seas ran high. We were carried onto invisible shoals. The gales were headstrong and drove us through seas where the surge boiled over near forbidding rocks, and we few have drifted hither to your coasts. Now tell us, who dwell here? What motherland is so barbarous that it allows such practices? For we are debarred even from such a welcome as barren sands can offer. Your people have started to assault us, and allow us no foothold on the shore. If you have no respect for mortal men or mortal arms, you should at least remember that there are gods who know right from wrong. Aeneas was our king. No one was ever more just than he, nor any greater in righteousness or in prowess at war. If destiny preserves him still, and if he does not lie yet among the unpitying shades, but still draws strength from heaven's air, then there is no fear, nor would you ever regret it if you took the first step to compete with him in the exchange of kindnesses. We also have cities in Sicily, well able to fight, and Acestes is there, a prince of fame from the blood of Troy. And we now desire your permission to beach our storm-damaged ships, and in your forests to shape timbers and strip wood for oars, so that we may sail for Italy and Latium, contented if we may make Italy our destination, and if our king and our comrades are restored to us. If, however, salvation is denied us, and if you, great and good chieftain of Trojans, lie deep in the African Ocean, and if we can no longer see in Iulus our nation's future, we can yet make for Sicily's narrow sea, whence our voyage here began, and where a place awaits us, and there take Acestes for our king. So spoke Ilioneus, and all the other Trojans quickly acclaimed him. Dido then gave her answer, shortly, with lowered eyes. Trojans, cast fear from your thoughts and entertain no anxieties. Life is hard for us, and this is a new kingdom. That's why I am compelled to take such grave precautions. I have to use guards and keep extensive watch on my frontiers. But who can there be who has never heard of Aeneas and his kindred, of Troy's city and the valour of her men, or of that war's dreadful blaze? We Phoenicians are not so dull of mind, nor is the sun, when he harnesses his horses, so remote from our Tyrian city. Whether your choice is for illustrious Hesperia, the land which Saturn ruled, or for the region by Eryx, where Acestes would be your king, I shall help you to depart in safety under my protection, and give you aid from my possessions. Or would you rather settle here in my realm, on an equal footing with me? Count as your own city, this city which I am erecting. Beach your ships. There will be no question of making a distinction between Trojans and Tyrians. But now I only wish your king Aeneas himself might appear, forced hither like you by the same gales. I shall certainly send reliable men along the coast, with orders to range far and wide through Africa, in the hope that he's been cast ashore and is lost in some city or some forest. Her speech startled Achates the brave, and Aeneas, his chieftain too. They had long felt eager to break free from the cloud. It was Achates who spoke first, addressing Aeneas. Son of the goddess, what do you now advise? You see that all is safe, and we've even recovered our comrades and our ships. Only one friend's missing, and we ourselves saw him drowned amidst the waves. All else agrees with your mother's prophecy. Scarcely had he said this when the cloud enveloping them suddenly parted and melted away into clear air. Aeneas checked his walk, and in the bright light he shone. His face and his shoulders bore a divine beauty, for his mother had imparted a grace to his hair. She'd shed on him a rich glow of youth, and set a gay sparkle in his eyes, like the shine which art can give to ivory, or like silver or marble inlaid in yellow gold. Then suddenly, to the surprise of all, he addressed the queen. Here I am, in your presence, the one for whom you all look. I am Aeneas the Trojan, rescued from the African seas. Queen, you alone have felt pity for the unutterable ordeals of Troy, and now you would receive us as partners in your city and your home, us, a mere remnant left over by the Greeks, and in desperate need, our strength all drained away by every misfortune of land and sea. To thank you fitly, Dido, is not within our power, or the power of any other survivors of the Dardan race who may still exist, dispersed in any part of the vast world. But if powers of the beyond take thought for the good, if there exists anywhere any justice at all, or some intelligence able to know the right, then may your true reward come from them. What joyous world gave you your life? Who were great enough to be parents to one such as you? So long as rivers shall hurry to the sea, so long as shadows shall drift over a mountain shoulder, and so long as the sky gives pasture to the stars, so long shall live the honour which is your due, your praises and your name, to whatever land I may be called. So saying, he reached out with his right hand to his friend Ilioneus, and with his left to Serestus, and then to the others, the brave Gaius and the valiant Cloanthus. At her first sight of Aeneas, Phoenician Dido was awestruck, thinking of the terrible fate which had been his. Then she spoke. Son of the goddess, what is this fortune which has been pursuing you through such fearful perils? What compulsion now flings you on this barbarous shore? Can you truly be that Aeneas whom Venus, the kind life-giver, bore to Dardan Anchises by the waters of Phrygian Simois? Now I myself remember Teucer coming to Sidon, for he had been banished from his own homeland, and wished to win a new realm with aid from Belus my father, who at that time was pillaging Cyprus, the rich island which he had conquered and then held under his sway. Ever since that time I have known of the calamity which befell Troy, and known you, and the Greek princes by name. Even your journey, Teucer gave the Trojans his very highest praise. Even your enemy, Teucer gave the Trojans his very highest praise, claiming to be himself descended from the same ancient Teucrian stock. Therefore, come, gallant friends, and proceed to my home. A fortune not unlike yours has harassed me, and led me too, through many tribulations, to rest at long last in this country. My own acquaintance with misfortune has been teaching me to help others who are in distress. After speaking so to Aeneas, she led him into the palace, and as she walked she gave orders for temple offerings in thanks to the gods. She also remembered to send 20 bulls to Aeneas's friends on the shore, with 100 bristling hogs' backs, 100 fat lambs with their ewes, and the gods' joyous gift of wine. Inside the palace, the preparations were regally sumptuous. They were making ready a banquet in the central hall. There was drapery artistically worked in princely purple, a massive array of silver on the tables, and gold plate engraved with the heroic deeds of this people's ancestors in a long succession of historic events throughout all the generations since their nation's birth. But Aeneas found that his love for his son would not let his mind rest. He sent Achates swiftly to the ships, with instructions to tell Ascanius the news, and to bring him to the walled city, for the loving father's every thought was fixed on Ascanius. Achates was also to fetch presents, things rescued from the fall of Troy, a figured gown stiff with gold lace, and a mantle hemmed with a yellow thistle pattern, both garments which had graced Argive Helen. Fine gifts from her mother Leda, which she had carried off from Mycenae when she first started for Troy, and her wicked marriage. Aeneas added a sceptre once borne by Priam's eldest daughter Ilione, a necklace shaped like a row of mulberries, and a double diadem of gold set with jewels. Achates hastened to obey and was soon on his way to the ship, but meanwhile Venus was pondering new plans and new devices. She decided to make Cupid assume the form and features of the charming Ascanius and go in place of him. He should give Dido the presents, and as he did so, inflame her with the distraction of love, and entwine the fire of it about her very bones, for Venus could not help fearing the uncertainty of a home menaced by Phoenician duplicity. Juno's savage will tormented her, and as night drew on her anxiety returned. Therefore she spoke to her winged son. Son, you alone are my strength, and all my might is in you. Son, you even scorn the father's Typhoean thunderbolts. Now I appeal to you, and humbly pray to your divine majesty for aid. You know how your brother Aeneas has travelled storm-tossed on the ocean round every coast, solely on account of merciless Juno's persistent hate. You've often sympathised with me in my sorrow, and now Phoenician Dido detains him and talks to him, coaxing him to stay with her. I'm anxious about the outcome of any entertainment which Juno sanctions. She will certainly not be slow to act at this critical moment. Therefore I plan to forestall her by a trick of my own, and enclose the queen in such a girdle of flames that no act of divine power may divert her from submitting, as I intend, to a fierce love for Aeneas. To enable you to effect this, listen now to my plan. Aeneas, his dear father, has now sent for the young prince, who is my own greatest love, and he is now preparing to go to the Phoenician city with gifts, things saved from the fire of Troy and from the ocean perils. I shall lull him into a profound sleep, and then hide him away in my hallowed precinct high up on Cythera, or at Idalium. For otherwise he might learn of the trick, or appear suddenly while it's being played. You must just for one night assume his shape as a disguise and wear his familiar features. After all, he's a boy like you. And then, during the royal entertainment, when the wine is flowing and Dido in her great happiness clasps you to her, embracing you and planting on you her sweet kisses, you shall breathe into her invisible fire and poison her without her knowing. Cupid obeyed his dear mother's command. He took off the wings from his shoulders and in great amusement copied Ulysses' way of walking. Venus now poured delicious and pervasive sleep into Iülus, and holding him closely and caressingly, she carried him by her divine power to Idalium's wooded upland, where soft Amaracus guarded him amid flowers and shade, and spread sweetness with the perfume which it breathed. The obedient Cupid was soon on his way, carrying the royal gifts for the Queen of Carthage, and happy in the guidance of Achates. When he arrived, the Queen had just composed herself, proudly curtained on her golden seat in the centre. And here Troy's chieftain Aeneas and all the manhood of Troy foregathered, and took their places on coverlets of purple. Attendants held water for them to wash their hands, passed them bread in baskets, and brought napkins of soft material. Beyond, within the palace, waited 50 serving maids, each at her station, whose office it was to replenish the capacious storerooms and rekindle the hearth-fire of the home. There were 100 other maids and 100 manservants, all matched for age, to load the food onto the tables and set forth the drink. Many Carthaginians who had been invited to take their places on the embroidered banquet seats entered through the festal doorways. They wondered at the gifts from Aeneas and at Iülus, the divinity in disguise, now wearing a flush of emotion and speaking in his assumed character. They admired the sceptre and the mantle hemmed with the yellow thistle pattern. But beyond all the rest, the unhappy Phoenician Dido, condemned now to sure destruction, could not satisfy her longing. She gazed, and the fire in her grew. She was affected equally by the boy and by the beautiful gifts. Cupid had been clinging to Aeneas and embracing him with his arms around his neck, expressing great love for his supposed father. Then he crossed to the Queen. Dido's eyes and her whole mind were fixed on him, and at times she would fondle him and hold him close to her, for she couldn't know, poor Dido, how mighty a god was entering her. And then he, remembering the wish of his mother, the Cyprian, began gradually to dispel from Dido all thoughts of Sychaeus, and he assailed that heart of hers so long inactive, and her brain so unused to these thoughts, with the thrill of a living love. The banquet came to its first pause, and tables were removed. They set in place great bowls of wine and filled them to the brim. Loud talk broke out in the palace, and the voices rolled through the hall's great spaces. There were lamps hanging from the gold-panelled ceiling, and a blaze of candles vanquished the darkness. The Queen asked for a jewelled drinking bowl of heavy gold. She filled it with wine of full strength, as the first Belus and his successors had filled it often before. There was a call for silence in the palace, and she spoke. Jupiter, you who are said to have created the laws of hospitality, may it be your wish to make this day a fortunate day for the Phoenicians and for the exiles from Troy, a day to be remembered by our descendants. May Bacchus, giver of joy, and Juno the generous grant their blessing. Phoenicians, show your goodwill and make our gathering festive. So saying, she poured out a drink offering onto the table. After the libation, she first touched the drink with her own lips, and passed it then to Bitias with a challenge. He boldly drank all the foaming bowl, soaking himself from the full gold vessel. Other Phoenician lords drank after him, and Iappas of the long hair took his lyre bound with gold, and his music rang. The great master Atlas had been his teacher. He sang now of the wandering moon and the labouring sun, of the origin of men and beasts, of rain, of fire, of Arcturus and the Hyads, which foretell the rain, and of the two bears. His song told why on each winter day the sun so hastens to dip in ocean, and told of the cause which then retards the nights and makes them slow. The Phoenicians cheered and cheered again, and the Trojans applauded with them, and the doomed Dido herself spent the whole night in talk of many kinds, drinking deep of her love. She asked question after question about Priam and Hector. She asked what arms the son of the dawn had carried when he came to Troy, and inquired now of the quality of Diomedes' horses, and now of the stature of Achilles. And then she said, "But come, you must tell me, guest of mine, the whole story from the beginning of the trap which the Greeks set, the calamity which befell your people, and your own wanderings, for it is now the 7th summer of your roaming over the land and sea throughout the world." that's the end of book one. I'll be back shortly with book two.